Welcome to the Mosaic podcast. We're so happy to have you here. The Mosaic Society is all about celebrating the intersections of our identity, whether it's through culture, spirituality, or civics. We're three friends exploring these paths together. I'm T. Marie, your cultural mosaic.
I'm Roseberry, the voice of the spiritual mosaic.
And I'm Shreya, bringing in the civic mosaic. Our mission is to strengthen friendships through exploring each other's passions and to inspire confidence for you to show up as your true self in your communities.
We'll be sharing new insights, ideas, and conversations each week with fresh posts every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And of course, this podcast on Sundays. So let's dive in and explore the many intersections of identity together. Hi, guys. We're the Mosaic Society. Welcome back. We're in New York right now. We planned a little trip out to see Shreya. We'll see each other, but we're at Shreya's place. And so we're all in the same room. Like the setup is a little weird. So it might sound a little weird because we're all on mute unless we're talking. We'll just try it out and see how it goes. But if it sounds off at some point, that's why. But today is our first themed week for Mosaic Society. This week we are talking about colorism from different perspectives, just to explain, I guess. The way that the themed weeks work is that once a month we pick a week where we each cover the same topic, but through different perspectives. So through the spiritual or the cultural or the civic perspective, or just our own individual personal perspectives and experiences that we've had. So this week we decided to talk about colorism. Today we have our colorism joint statement going out on Sunday, and then each of us will have a different posts going out on our respective days. So what we're going to do for this podcast is first, we're going to just quickly summarize what we're talking about in our individual posts. So each of us will give a summary of what we talked about with colorism and the perspective and experiences we've had. And then we each came up with questions for the other based off of the post that we've had or the post that we've written. So first we'll do the summaries and then we'll go into questions that we have for each other.
So for my article, I'm looking at colorism through the lens of Spike Lee's 1988 film School Days. So in the article, I touch on a lot of the beginning occurrences of colorism, I guess you can say. I look at historically with slavery, the house slave versus the field slave, and how that has kind of transcended and how those attitudes have really perpetuated themselves in the Black community. And of course, looking through his film, he gives colorism depictions in many different ways. But I really stress on the impact that it had on Black women through the two groups that he has, the quote unquote jigaboos and wannabes, and how he sets up those two groups. So, yes.
So, so I looked at the legacy of colonialism and understanding how colorism has impacted India. A lot of what I've researched shows that colorism, or how do I say, the form of colorism is very similar in all South Asian communities like India, Pakistan, or let's say the post-colonial countries, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. But I focused on India. So I started off with the question of whether colorism was something that we always had, or was it something that was introduced to our societies through colonialism? So I try to compare it with ancient India, look at ancient texts like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, and to understand how exactly they've described characters, wherever they have described characters, and to understand what was considered the ideal when it comes to beauty, and whether beauty or appearances mattered when it came to respectability in society. And then I moved on to looking at external influences such as imperialism, colonialism, and see how that impacted the way the Indians looked at each other and themselves, how they perceived themselves. Finally, I go into the most exciting part of what I most exciting part that I of my blog post. I had the most fun researching it was how exactly colorism has manifested itself from makeup, skincare, movies, even worship. So yeah, it was interesting. That's my post.
Lovely.
Okay. So for my post on colorism this week, I talked a lot about it was basically like a diary from the perspective of a dark skin, black skin. Just gonna start over if that's okay. That's okay. I'm gonna start over, okay? We heard it. We move on. Just a disclaimer. I'm feeling sick. That's why I sound this way. That's why I look this way. Anyway, so for my post this week, I essentially wrote like a letter from the perspective of a dark-skinned Black woman and the experiences that we go through in society, specifically American society. But I think colorism, when it comes to dark-skinned Black women specifically, and the experiences that they have within and outside their community, there's a universal struggle that we have. I feel like a lot of times we've been subjected to exclusion, stereotypes, and a lot of dehumanizing portrayals in both social media, but also society as a whole. And then also when we start talking about Eurocentric beauty standards, it continues to elevate lighter skinned women while pressuring dark skinned Black women to conform to a beauty standard that doesn't work for them. It was never created for them. And this really got highlighted last year, the Shits and Gig podcast. It highlighted the issue of the lack of support that a lot of Black men give Black women, specifically dark skinned Black women, when they went on a podcast and the host of the podcast made some degrading remarks about Black women and they just sat there and laughed. So it really highlights Malcolm X's quote where he says, it's something along the lines of like, the most disrespected person, the most unprotected person, all that is a Black woman in America. Yet, despite all that rejection and societal neglect, dark skinned Black women continue to affirm themselves and redefine beauty on their own, fight for the respect and dignity they deserve. So, there's beauty that comes with the struggle that's there, but the struggle shouldn't be there to begin with. So, a lot of times, I feel like now we're at a point with social media where it's become a battleground for dark skinned Black women to stand up for themselves, even though by doing that, they face relentless harassment. And that's what I talked about. So now let's go into questions. I'm gonna ask T a question first. My question has to deal with first your reaction to the movie. What part or what portrayal of colorism do you think strikes you the most when it came to the way that Spike Lee, right? He's the director. The way that Spike Lee portrayed colorism in that movie. And then what do you think the Black community can do to wake up in order to fight colorism and to uplift each other? Do you see any hope or any progress so far?
Yeah, so the aspect I touched on it of the movie that struck me a lot was the division with the Black women and also the hair texture bias. So historically, going back even to the beginnings of slavery, a lot of the justification that white people used for it was white supremacy or white superiority. And somewhere down the line, we as a Black community began to subscribe to aspects of that ideology as well. And on the spectrum of Blackness, a closer proximity to whiteness just became attractive. And I think it's really interesting in School Days how Spike Lee decides to stage the two groups against each other from an ideology point of view, and even behind the scenes, how he did that. He actually had the different groups stay in different hotel conditions, and that naturally drove up some of the tensions that were on set, which I actually think was very, very interesting for him. But there's this big number in School Days, and I believe it's called Good and Bad Hair. And even before I'd watched it, because as a child, it's not completely appropriate to watch for some parts of it, but I always knew this number because the choreography, just the two groups pinned against each other, was always striking for me as even as a little girl. And so the lead up to this musical number, they're throwing back insults at each other: pickaninny, high yellow heifer, Barbie doll, tar baby, wanna be white, jigaboo, etc. And then they go into the whole musical number. And there's the good hair crew, the wannabe whites. That's how they're depicted in the movie. They have certain lines that just really kind of hit home. For example, like, don't you wish you had hair like this? Then the boys would give you a kiss, which directly addresses the role that Black men have in upholding colorism. And they're often associated with having a privilege of higher status because of their skin, because of their hair, and being more conformist towards like European beauty standards and ideals. Versus on the other side, the Jigaboo group, it's well, you're a wanna be better than me, and that kind of portrays like a stronger connection to Black pride, black culture, and the sense of like rebellion and resistance to societal standards. And so I really liked the way that Spike Lee set this up, because I think it really created a striking conversation. And obviously, the movie came out late 80s. We're still dealing with the impacts of colorism today. And we as a Black community, I don't think we've woken up. I think obviously with the rise of social media, a lot of things, not just colorism, a lot of issues, there's more awareness. You get to see it more. But I do think a culture of accountability is kind of being established more so. So while I don't think we're truly woken up, because it's hard to address our internalized colorism. Slavery was 400 years. It started 1619, the first boat docked in Virginia. That was a long time, and that's a lot of social engineering that we as a community went through. So I don't think we're truly woken up. I just think some of us are more aware, and we're more so crafting accountability for ourselves. And I think there's just certain harmful, even practices within families where there's preferential treatment towards lighter children versus darker children. I think we're working to change that, but I don't think we're truly there. So I do see signs of progress, but I think we still have a long way to go. Question for Shreya. In your article, you mentioned how the Black Lives Matter movement led to some rebranding from fairness to brightness. Did this push come from a certain demographic slash group in India? And do you think this is a problem that shows potential of improving with time?
Okay, it has improved with time. I'm not going to deny that. I also feel Indian society is wired in a way where you won't, okay, in a family setup, if suppose someone is, okay, let me give you an example of what it's like in an Indian family. Okay, just have you seen the Korean drama Beauty Inside? Nod if you have. The one with Cha Yoon.
Oh, I don't know if that's the name, but yes.
Oh, sorry, my bad. The one where she basically has this makeup alter ego. Yeah, that one. Okay. So if you remember, if you remember watching the show, you'd remember you'd see that the first episode, as part of the backstory of this girl, according to traditional beauty standards in her family or in her society, she is not pretty, and her mother says that it's okay. All this is unnecessary. If you study well, that's all that matters. You need to be successful. So if you're successful, everything else will work out. That's what happens in India. It's not that not dark skin doesn't mean that you're immediately considered to be dumb or stupid or incapable. It just means that you're not pretty. If you show value, if you show your worth through, uh, if you have other talents, if you're really good at music, if you're good at art, if you're good at studying, or if you have like a really good, if you have a good career path ahead of you, then that's somehow removed from your skin tone in a family setup. Yes, you will find that there is a little bit of pretty privilege, pretty white privilege in that sense that people who are lighter skinned would be treated preferably by the older generations. That you can find that they're more affectionate. They have colorist tendencies right from the beginning, and they would tend to be more kind and nicer to the fair skinned child. They'd consider them beautiful, and then they'd always find other adjectives for the child. They'll say, "Oh, you're dark, but you have nice features," or they'd say things like, "You're very smart." So it's a little more complex when it comes to the family setup. Families are more accepting of the fact that it's okay, your skin tone does not matter. The evenness of your skin tone matters. The quality of your skin matters. The beauty inside. That's how they try to frame it these days. Earlier, I think it went through a transition, a period where everybody's like, the beauty inside matters. Outward skin does not matter. Okay, which basically is saying that you're not pretty, but it doesn't matter because you have a beautiful soul, which I think it plays to the same standards. And then it went down a step further that color does not matter. You're beautiful regardless, inside and out. So that's something that families are doing these days. A lot of families are doing it these days. But it still remains that if you, let's say in a family where there's nobody who's darker skinned, they would tend to prefer someone who's lighter skinned because they have that ingrained bias in them. They're not bad people. That's just how they perceive beauty. It's wrong, it needs to change, but it's in a way that's conditioned in them. So when the Black Lives Matter started in the United States, there were a few organizations in India that took this up and said that, hey, in India, colorism is really bad. And this can go back to even before Black Lives Matter, early 2000s, where there were organizations that went ahead saying that, oh, skin all is beautiful, dark is beautiful, but it didn't really get a lot of traction in the sense that it did make more well-read people understand that beauty exists in all shapes, forms, and colors, but it didn't have that major impact in, let's say, the industries, like the fairness industry or the beauty industry. But during Black Lives Matter, there was a huge campaign that was, I think, largely because of the involvement of social media that made Indians, netizens, realize that, hey, this particular brand, Fair and Lovely, is toxic. And it just says that you have to be fair to be lovely. And it just tells you how to change your skin tone, which is not possible in general. Skin color, not tone. Skin color is not possible at all. It's promoting this toxic behavior where you feel that you're not worthy, you're not beautiful unless you're fair. And all those ads where they show this one person transitioning from dark to light is wrong. So that's when they changed the names of these industries. So while the movement Black Lives Matter was pivotal to to create an awareness that this is wrong and therefore industry should not be playing to it. The change already, you could see the roots of that change from way before then. And it's still not completely changed the way people look at each other. So there was this one lady I met. My mother met this one lady. I've written this in the blog post as well. She met this one lady and she was seeing pictures of me. And the thing with me is that I look different in different lighting. So this woman looked at a picture of me and then she looked at another picture of me and she asked my mother, "Do you have twins? Or is this your daughter's sister?" Um, my mother's like, "What?" And then this lady goes on. My mother's like, she's just looking at her. She's like, my mother's confused. And this lady goes like, then you see, my son's really fair. And I was like, okay, so what should I do? Oh, all right, why are you giving me this information? And it just shows that the bias is deep. Yeah. Anyway, so this is just a little tidbit that this was way after all of this was after 2020, 2020, after 2020. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's always interesting how colorism is something that affects communities everywhere, different cultures all over the world, and yet we still don't acknowledge it enough. Like I still don't hear enough conversations about colorism happening. Every time the conversation about colorism happens, it's with those who are being oppressed because of colorism every single time. It's not necessarily happening within the communities. I don't see that happening as much. But yeah, anyway, Sherry, ask your question.
Before I ask a question, I just had to add this bit. There was this one makeup artist, shout out to her. I mean, we can put her name up when I find her article, but she was somebody who just entered the beauty industry and she started doing bridal makeup in Kerala. Kerala is in the south of India. Traditionally, or mostly, if you can generalize, most South Indians are dark skinned. And she found that even amongst the dark skinned women, they did not want to look the skin tone, show their real skin in their wedding or at their wedding. They wanted to look lighter because that's what the standard of beauty is. You look two shades lighter and that's you. That's beautiful. So even if a makeup artist says you look beautiful the way you are, let me just highlight that. One, you won't find makeup brands that have your shade. If you do end up getting hand on some that have your shade, the bride or the bride's family does not like it. They end up coming up with comments at the wedding or at a function saying that, "Oh, the bride's sister looks better than the bride. Or the bride does not look all that great. She doesn't look bright." Nobody uses the word fair anymore. They use the word bright, which is weird. Sorry. Moving on to a question for who am I supposed to be asking a question to, right? Rose. Okay. Rose, you spoke about the experience of dark-skinned Black women in the United States. And I was just wondering if you see any change in the societal perceptions through social movements, or if there's been any movement from within the society or through the larger national context, if there's been any social movement that has changed societal perceptions. If yes, when did this begin? Like when can you trace back these changes, or let's say awareness about? Colorism. And I have a follow-on to that. What role do parental figures and families play in the development of self-worth amongst dark-skinned women?
That question is very interesting to say the least. I think there's been a shift in how dark-skinned Black women specifically are speaking up, especially around the issues when it comes to beauty standards and self-worth. And I don't know if you guys ever saw, but Netflix came out with this movie a few years back called Nappily Ever After. Do y'all remember that? You watch it, T, Shreya? It's basically this movie. I don't even remember if I watched it all, honestly. I think I like watched like the first few, like the first hour maybe. But essentially, it's this Black woman who is always like growing up, her mom always straightened her hair and told her like basically tied her beauty and her worth to her appearance. And so at a certain point, she ends up shaving her head, and then she falls in love with this Black man who's in love with her, who she it's this whole journey she has with her sense of beauty and moving away from just damaging her hair to have straight hair to fit those Eurocentric beauty standards. And I feel like around that time, I think I was still in college for sure. It was probably around COVID. I feel like you could start seeing dark skinned Black women speak up a lot more. You could start seeing the stories and the experiences of dark skinned Black women and the colorism that they face and the struggles that they face being highlighted more. But the reactions are still so crazy. Every single time I hear or I see a Black woman or a dark-skinned Black woman speak up about colorism that they face, the struggles that they face, the comments, the reactions, it's always like either one extreme of like you're ungrateful or you're doing too much. Or it's the one I hear the most is, oh, you're creating a divide in the community. Like, you're fine. You're good as you are. Like, don't, we're a community. And I feel like if we really want to progress as a community, if we're sitting here, we're fighting for Black Lives Matter, we're sitting here, we're fighting for our equal rights, wouldn't you want to hold each other accountable to the values and the morals that we want to hold our oppressors accountable to? I always think about that. Like we expect our oppressors to treat us equally. We expect our oppressors to treat us equally. We expect our oppressors to respect us for who we are and not expect us to have these unrealistic standards and just respect our culture, our race, our identity. But then within our community, when it comes to colorism, we don't do that to ourselves. And when we try to hold each other accountable, it's met with a lot of hate and anger. Like, I think it was last year too, there's this TikToker. I don't know how to pronounce her name. Gloria, I think. I used to say Glorilla, and then I learned that Glorilla is a rapper. And I learned that she's a rapper, but there is a TikToker, I think it's GOLLRA or I'm sorry. But she really advocates for dark skinned Black women, especially in the beauty industry, when it comes to like inclusions of different shade products. And there was this one day I opened TikTok, and the very first thing that popped up is she had put out a statement that she was taking a break from social media because she says that it's been so toxic and it's a very dangerous environment for her to be in, advocating for herself as a dark skinned Black woman. And I know that a lot of those struggles didn't just come from white women. It's rooted in colorism. It's light-skinned women not speaking up for the experiences of dark-skinned women. And of course, that's a generalization. There are light-skinned women I've seen stand up for dark-skinned women. But I think oftentimes, as a society, we kind of settle. Okay, so thanks for joining us. This is actually Colorism Part 1. We've been talking for about 2 hours, honestly, a little bit more. So we realized that we have to split this podcast into two. So if you would like to join us and listen to Part 2 of this podcast, where we talk a little bit more about the influences of gender and the way that gender influences colorism for dark-skinned Black men and dark-skinned Black women. Or if you want to learn a little bit more about with India and colonization and the effects that colorism has had there, including with the caste system, then tune in next week and we'll dive a little bit more into all of that. But for now, thanks. We will roll the outro now. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Mosaic podcast.
Don't forget to follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and Spotify to stay updated on new posts and episodes. Also, tune in to our blog where T. Marie posts every Monday, Roseberry every Wednesday, and I, Shreya, every Thursday.
We're grateful you're here, and we look forward to embracing the intersections of identity together in the episodes to come. Until next time.
Stay curious.
Stay true.
and stay unapologetically you. Bye.